Hey there, students. Make sure you are staying hydrated. Make sure to keep those hands hydrated. Make sure that you are washing your hands, just like we have washed our hands from all of the post-World War II content. Okay, the course now only goes to 1945. Now, luckily, unlike with AP Euro, basically what I did with the Corona class in AP Euro was already is obsolete now, but we still are on content that is going to be on the exam. Now, Friday's planned class on the New Deal didn't happen because of all the fanfare with the announcement. So with that, now I would think about that totally, Dom. I would think about the not drinking water thing. Stay hydrated. But with that, we want to do the New Deal today. Okay, so that was going to be what? Yes, it is. My daughter told me I should buy it, and I bought it. Okay, so yeah, no curtain today. The curtain's over there. I was doing some Instagram live. If y'all aren't following me on Instagram, you should be. Okay, so if you're not on Instagram, follow me on Instagram. You should be. And let's go ahead and we'll do some shout outs pretty soon. Okay, so we're going to see. I'm just going to see what's going on here, and we will take a look here at the new followers. Okay, so if Sophie Annis is here, then you have followed me recently on Instagram. I'll be doing some occasional shout outs, so keep that in mind. And let's go ahead and start getting to questions. Okay, so can I play guitar for you? I have been broadcasting every night on Instagram. So Instagram Live is where I'm doing the guitar playing. This is a class. Okay, yeah, that is a Lego Star Wars box in the background, Kylo Ren's Starfighter, which my daughter and I need to finish putting together. Okay, so let's go ahead, and Claire has got a question about New Deal programs. Okay, so which New Deal programs are the most important? And it's really, now here's something that I think we want to really focus on, since we're not going to have a multiple choice on this exam this year, that basically, all of the programs are just as good as any others. And typically, one thing, because what's in the course and exam description doesn't really matter. What matters is whether it's an LEQ or an SAQ format, is what's going to matter is which ones can you use to get into relief, recovery, and reform. Okay, so let me actually go into some of my old tutoring notes, and I think I've recently done something with the New Deal. Let's see here what we've got here. So New Deal. All right. So let's go ahead and, yeah, so I've got some stuff here that I can work with, and then I'm going to open up a Google document like I usually do, and we're going to get that started. Okay, so we're going to go into my Google Drive here. Just give me a second. Wash your hands while you're waiting on me. And let's see here. Where is the, let's see. So US Vid 03. All right, we're going to go ahead and give this a title. And so US Vid 03. The New Deal. Okay, so what we want to note here is I'm going to go ahead and copy that link, and now y'all have got a link to my Google document, and I'm about to share my screen with y'all so that we can get into these important New Deal programs. Okay, so the most important thing is you're looking at the New Deal's overall goals. Okay, the overall goals of the New Deal were relief, recovery, and reform. And we want to note, we want to note what these are. Okay, so one thing, now we need to compare FDR and Herbert Hoover. Okay, so first thing that we want to do is we want to think about FDR and Herbert Hoover. Now, last time on Wednesday, one thing that we noted is we want to get away from the myth that Hoover was not doing anything. Okay, so, Hoover did try to use government actions. Now, he tried to use, in most cases, the wrong government actions. Okay, so we're looking at, they both used government to influence the economy. They both tried to respond to the Great Depression. Both had both had programs, both introduced programs, introduced policies and programs that were not, you know, not immediately successful. Okay, not particularly successful in bringing about recovery. Okay, but what we want to note here is the idea of direct relief. You know, that is the biggest contrast between Herbert Hoover and FDR, is this idea of direct relief, that, you know, basically Herbert Hoover believed that that is beyond the scope of government, and FDR says that is well within the scope of government. Now, as far as this goes, we want to think about the goals of the New Deal being the 3 R's. Okay, so relief, recovery, and reform. Okay, so now we think of relief. Okay, so the first thing here is provide economic relief for Americans who are struggling. Okay, so provide direct economic relief for Americans who are struggling during the Depression. Now, let me just run in here real quick. I've got some Turkish coffee going that I've just got to stir once in a while, make sure it doesn't overboil. Okay, I'll be right back with y'all. Take a little break, you know, wash your hands real quick. I think that this stuff's about ready. So yeah, when I get up, just give your hands a good wash. Okay, so as far as that goes, we think about relief, provide direct economic relief for Americans who are struggling. Now, what we see here are, you know, what they're doing here in what we could think of is make work. Okay, so make work projects. And we also want to note, if we go to the APUSH course and exam description. Okay, so when we look at the New Deal, and this kind of previews some things that we're going to see in terms of what questions are they going to ask us. Okay, so let's go ahead and note here. So New Deal attempted to end the Great Depression by using government power to provide relief for the poor, stimulate recovery, and reform the American economy. Okay, so when we think about relief, recovery, or reform, now note that no particular New Deal agencies are mentioned here. Okay, so the thing is, when you think about this, it's more in the examples that you can bring up. So you can really pick the New Deal agencies. They have specifically not put those into the exam. And so provide direct economic relief for Americans who are struggling. Now, this is a success. Okay, this is something that is successful in terms of, you know, what we're looking at here. Now, let me see if it says anything about, never says anything about quote unquote Keynesian economics. Okay, but basically what happened here is you've got make work projects. Okay, and what I mean by make work projects is they provided work for the unemployed. Okay, so they provided work for the unemployed on, you know, public works projects. Okay, and so go ahead, and while I go check on my coffee again, I think I'm going to pour this time. The Works Progress Administration and the Civilian Conservation Corps. Okay, so as far as that goes, these would be 2 examples of something that would be for economic relief. Now, what I would do is I would either pick one or both of these, and you think about these 2 examples here that you can bring in. Okay, now what I want to do here, I'd love to bring somebody on camera. Okay, I'd love to bring somebody on camera, and, you know, like, actually anybody volunteer wants to tell us about one of these things, come and talk to me. Okay, so as far as that goes, and please don't ask me period number questions. Make questions about actual content, like ask me specific questions that are going to be on the exam. This exam is now divided into topics. Now, is there anybody that's like, hey, I want to actually come on camera and talk to you about the Works Progress Administration? Okay, so see if anybody is up for that. Okay, somebody wants to come in. Y'all go ahead and volunteer. Anybody? Okay, so you're up. Who's going to say? I mean, just let me know if you volunteer, and I'll get your camera going. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead. Choose Anya. Okay, Anya has to somebody has to volunteer. Y'all can't volunteer other people. You have to say that I volunteer. Okay, like it's no good. It's no good unless somebody is going to actually volunteer. Okay, Vinny, if you're volunteering, go ahead and join us. Okay, go ahead and join us. Tell us that you want to do that. Okay, so again, I can't. Okay, like yeah, all right. So we could get Miss Lennox in here to get on her board. Okay, all it takes is one person to say that I would like to go live. That's all it takes. Okay. So with that, okay, we'll just go ahead and I guess I'm just going to kind of keep flying solo here. All right. So with that, we'll just go ahead and get into the Works Progress Administration. Basically, this was constructing public buildings and roads. Okay, so the Works Progress Administration is constructing public buildings and roads. Okay, and then we see here that the Civilian Conservation Corps. Okay, so state and national parks. Okay, and there's actually, I'm going to go ahead and let's see, I need to share my screen with y'all again, I believe. Or did anybody say that that they're okay? So we still don't see anybody here. Okay, you'll do it. Okay, so Walker. Okay, let's see what Walker might want to say here in terms of providing economic relief. Okay, if we think about this, so we do have Walker has volunteered. Let's see if we can get Walker on camera. I love the interactive element of this. So if people are willing to get on camera, I think that's awesome. Okay, it looks like Walker is.
Hey, I don't have a camera, but I'm here.
Oh, okay. Well, Walker, go ahead and tell us a little something about now. Also, you may have another relief program that you want to bring in. Okay, so whether it's the Works Progress Administration or the Civilian Conservation Corps, or if there's another relief program, go for it. I'll be right back, and I can still hear you.
All right. Well, FDR's program about I think it was the Federal Housing Agency, the FHA. Let me just look it up here. FHA. So the FHA was one of FDR's programs in his administration that set standards for construction, and it gave people an easier time to purchase houses. It particularly helped people in the Depression by getting them through these arduous processes that are just buying a house, getting people a lot of their first homes and setting them up for success in that way, and not having a lot of homeless people out in the plains like we saw with a bunch of journalists that I forget her name that actually took the pictures. But you see a lot of these people without homes, without a lot of money. And so the Federal Housing Administration, for example, was a key program in getting people out of homelessness, getting people right into the working sectors by getting them out of debt, basically, in that sort of sense.
Okay, well, that was an excellent explanation here. And so when we look at the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, and this is something like, this is a great example of how this exam works, that I don't typically, teach the FHA. Okay, I don't typically get into this, but at the same time, this is something that everybody can get into. And so we see here, now also one thing we want to see is that this looks like something here, and Holly or any of the other teachers that are here, let me know what you think, is that this looks like, it's providing relief, but it also could be used for reform from what it looks like to me. Okay, because you're looking at some of this, due mortgages, refinancing was not available. And so basically the federal banking system is restructured as well. So this could be, when we look at the Federal Housing Administration, okay, so this could be something that is providing relief, okay, so Federal Housing Administration, okay, and we could also put this into the reform column, I believe, and let's see if Holly had anything to say. But yeah, y'all, he did a good job on that. I tell you what, whatever teacher offered him some extra credit, That is great here. Okay, so going with that, let's see. So yeah, so when we look at this, this is something that, now it depends on how it's argued. Okay, so when we look at it, we think about how it's argued. So Walker, I think, came up with a good argument about that. So I don't think that that would be, and also we're not going to see something as rigid as, relief, recovery, reform. This is kind of a rough kind of thing here. But yeah, so what we could see here is, that by default, we would probably be more likely to put this in the, in this column, because it is going, it is a reform measure that is designed to keep these things from happening again. Now, the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was a very important agency, even today. Like, I would say that if any of y'all had the thought over the weekend, did any of y'all think like, hey, I need to get outside, I'm going to go for a hike, and it's going to be interesting to see how many people, like, over the weekend, we don't really know because of the incubation period, but think about the number of people that were exposed to the coronavirus this weekend because they thought, you know what, I'm going to go out and go for a hike. And the thing is, everybody else was thinking the same thing. Okay, like, everybody was like, I'm going to go for a hike. And so everybody goes for a hike and everybody's there. Now, bring that to the Civilian Conservation Corps. All right, so the Civilian Conservation Corps. Now, Walker, do you know anything about the CCC?
Just a bit, but I think I can get my head around it.
Oh, tell us. By all means, I liked your explanation earlier. So let's take a look at the CCC.
So the Civilian Conservation Corps was a program by FDR, another one, that gave work to around at least 1 million workers, right? And they basically gave them $30 a month, or within that range, gave the guys who worked. Huh?
That was really good. What's your target score on the exam? What you trying to make?
The best I can.
Okay, I think you sound like somebody cruising to a 5. Okay, so yeah, keep telling us about this.
They got $30 a month, and $5 would go directly to the guys who worked. Like, they would get to keep $5 of it. Then $25 of that per month would go back to their families. And so it gave millions of workers work, and it helped sustain millions of families too.
Okay, and so one thing about this is, yeah, that basically there's stuff that needs to be done. Now, Keynesian economics is never, like, it's not mentioned in the course and exam description, but the overall assumption here is John Maynard Keynes, who was a prominent economist in the 1920s and 1930s, he said that when there is a time of economic recession, that the government should, basically engage in deficit spending, okay? Because what happens here is that, it's time when the private sector is failing, then the public sector can go in and build things that need to be built anyway. So the CCC, if you went for a hike, Table Rock State Park, which is not too far away from where I live, this is a park that has a this park has, like, at the trailhead, it's got a plaque commemorating CCC workers who worked on the trail. And so these are things that we would say, like, it's great to have public parks. And so, the federal government is going to deficit spend, okay? And that's another thing about Herbert Hoover. When you look at Herbert Hoover, that Herbert Hoover tried to balance the budget, okay? And then FDR is engaging, is basically like, he embraced deficit spending, okay? So, basically this is Keynesian economics, okay? Keynesian economics. And if you want to know more about Keynesian economics, I'm sure that my friend Jacob Clifford has a video on that. So if you want to, get more about that. But basically what's going on there, and Walker, you did an excellent job here. Thank you for joining us today. And so we see here, yes, young men, okay? These are people like around the 18 to 25 range. And these young men were leaving their house, and they would live in campsites, okay? They would live in tents. Now, one thing that we want to note as well is we want to note the impact of the New Deal in the realignment. Like when you think about before FDR, African American voters tended to support the Republican Party, which they've done since radical Reconstruction. But, you know, the New Deal actually is the beginning of the realignment of Black voters to the Democratic Party. Now, as far as what the New Deal did and didn't do, yeah, this is my Turkish coffee set, you know, which is, I love Turkish coffee. And yeah, the tiny cup. Okay, so gotta head out. You're welcome to watch the archive later. It'll be around. And so, as far as that goes, before somebody noted my tiny cup, I swear I was talking about something. And so, when we look at that, you know, yeah, so Keynesian economics, deficit spending, yeah, right now you can see where, you know, the legacy of the New Deal, when you think about that, even like President Trump is talking about, you know, Republicans are largely, I mean, I think that from what I saw, that it was actually, I mean, I'm not sure, I don't know the whole story, but it's like that bill right now got stalled. I think you know, from what I read, now, of course, it could be biased. I hadn't looked into it, but the Democrats and the Republicans aren't able to agree on a relief package. But both the Democrats and the Republicans want to pass a relief package. So we see this idea of direct relief. And when you think about the legacy of the New Deal in American life, that when there's a crisis like this, okay, when we look at a crisis like this, that before the New Deal, it was like a lot of conservatives thought this is not the, you know, this is not where we, okay, so it failed for a second time, which, you know, it's something how, you know, you think about this versus like 9/11. If we were, you know, talking about, for example, in AP government, political polarization, that the political polarization in this country is like so high right now that they can't even drop like partisan, you know, partisan politics for something like this. But we want to note that in principle, the Democrats and Republicans largely agree that some sort of immediate direct relief is going to be needed. Okay, so you see, okay, so interesting there. So basically, okay, so they didn't vote for it. Got it. Okay, which you know, so the thing is that they are not agreed on how to do it, but they are agreed that something needs to be done. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes out. So we also want to note like the influence of Keynesian economics, but the Civilian Conservation Corps. Yeah. Now, one thing. Okay, I was talking about African American realignment. Now, FDR never advocated for a federal anti-lynching law. He never advocated for integration, because remember that part of the New Deal coalition was, you know, was Southern white voters. And so Southern white voters made up a key part. This is the solid South that had been the strongest Democratic constituency ever since the end of Reconstruction. So FDR wasn't going to do anything that was going to threaten his coalition. FDR was a brilliant politician. Now, Harry Truman after World War II, which is not on the exam, but just to note here, Harry Truman on the other hand, is not, it didn't care. You know, in 1948, when Truman integrated the armed forces, he did it in the middle of a campaign, an election year. He didn't care. And, you know, a lot of southern states didn't vote for him, went for the Dixiecrat Party with Strom Thurmond. But yeah, a complex understanding point somebody could go into, and, you know, go into how, you know, the legacy of the New Deal has, you know, has happened today. And as I've said before, don't write off the possibility of an LEQ being the assessment instrument. I think that the most likely culprits are going to be a set of SAQs or an LEQ. And I'm seeing a lot of advantages in my head for it being an LEQ. One of those being colleges and universities. I'm thinking colleges and universities are going to be like, okay, so this was taken at home, it was open book and all of that stuff, and they didn't have to write an essay. I'm thinking that's going to be a hard sell to colleges and universities. But then again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, so we'll prepare no matter what. And Debbie, thank you for the follow. SP Crane, thank you so much for the follow on Instagram. How Raw Smarty, Finney's Fun Adventures, and Caitlin Marie, Taryn, Caleb, D Patel, Emily, Spammy, Whammy, Kate, Vinny, Pellegrino, and Chloe1126. Thank y'all so much for the Instagram follows. So as far as that, yeah, I think that what we're going to see, well, an unconfirmed but credible rumor is that the College Board is going to invite you to use notes. Now, it makes sense when you think about it, because what I was concerned about is that there is going to be pressure on people to cheat who normally wouldn't cheat. Okay. Now, this is like, when you make Turkish coffee, it's not like filtered, it's unfiltered coffee. And you put the grounds, which are very finely grounded, into this little thing here and just put it on the stove. And so then, when it's done, like you see here, that it's got like, there are some Turkish people that they'll read your coffee grounds, like they'll read your fortune in the coffee grounds. So if you're just kind of curious about how this works, we're going to just put another little tiny cup of Turkish coffee, and there we go. So with that, so yeah, you just put it on a copper pot in the stove. You can buy all this stuff on Amazon. That's real dope, huh? All right. So as far as that goes, we're thinking about, African Americans and the New Deal, that FDR is not going to break up his coalition. But what he did do is that there were black CCC camps. Okay. So these make work projects, there were, like, for the first time, the federal government is looking at, okay, these are, the federal government is saying, like, these are people who need help. So black unemployment during the Depression was as high as 50%. Okay. So with that, you're thinking about that realignment. So the relief programs did provide much needed relief for African Americans who had felt, kind of abandoned by the Republican Party in the 1920s. All right. So with that, now also, if you want to follow me on Snapchat, that's Tom Richey SC, at Tom Richey on Twitter and Instagram, Tom Richey SC on Snapchat. All right. So as far as that goes, and Snapchat is really like, every once in a while, I'll just like put something up on my story, something I'm doing personally. And sometimes I'll put announcements, like I announced this on my Snapchat story. Or no, I announced the Euro win. Never mind. Okay. So as far as recovery, okay, so then we've got recovery. And recovery is, when we look at recovery, the goal here is to, bring about economic recovery. Okay, so help the economy get back on its feet. Basically, let me try not to use recovery. Right, help the economy get back on its feet. Okay, with by raising GDP and private sector employment. Okay, so on its feet, higher GDP and private sector employment. Now, what we want to note here is that the make work projects, they're providing relief, but we wouldn't call this economic recovery, because until the private sector recovers, you don't have a recovery. Okay. And this is largely, this is seen as, in the short term, definitely seen as a failure. And I'm not necessarily saying anything controversial here. The most reputable, Great Depression historians, New Deal historians, that the New Deal, really, you don't see the economy getting back on track until World War II. Basically, Europeans start killing each other, and all of a sudden our industry starts going again. So that's what pretty much ended the Depression. Now that's something I actually, teachers, y'all might be interested in this too. There's a new show, like kind of a short like mini series or something on HBO. I think the first episode's up now. It's called The Plot Against America, and this is set in the late. This is set in the late 1930s, like during the Depression. And so this is a show on HBO. Okay, so there was a novel in 2004. Whoa, and oh, okay. Whoa, I didn't realize that. Okay, this is an alternate history. Oh my goodness. I'm like, okay, so this isn't, oh wow. Man, I wish that I had, I thought I was watching a straight up history show. Jokes on me. Okay. So, Charles Lindbergh of the America First Committee, that this is, okay, interesting. It's actually an alternate history, but it's set in the late 1930s. And somebody's like, is Lindbergh going to run against FDR? Is Charles Lindbergh going to run against FDR? With all FDR's doing to try to help the economy and then the Depression. And then somebody that was talking to this guy who was saying, oh, with all FDR is trying to do to help the economy, it was like the Depression's not over. A lot of Americans by the late, by the 1940 election, which that makes sense now, because I was like, Charles Lindbergh, I don't think he ran for president or considered running for president. But when you think about somebody who might have been able to defeat FDR, that might have been somebody who could have done it. So I want to look more into that. But we do know that Charles Lindbergh played a prominent role in the America First Committee, which we'll talk about that more next time. So recovery, now the thing is we want to note that the economy didn't get on its feet until 1939, okay, until World War II started, okay? So the economy did not show sure signs of recovery until World War II began in 1939. And basically the United States, like, hey, we need to help people while people are killing each other. So as far as that goes, we can see here the National Recovery Administration. Now, also, you could note too, like, why isn't the economy recovering? Okay. The Agricultural Adjustment Act. Now, this is something that is very, very interesting here. And this was something that, they were giving people crop subsidies, basically buying livestock for slaughter, and paid farmers subsidies not to plant on part of their land. Okay. So essentially what's going on here is a lot of the New Deal programs, they were designed to provide relief for a group of people that was particularly suffering. But if you think about this, like, paying money not to plant crops on part of your land, that's not really a strategy for overall economic recovery, okay, when you think about that. So as far as that goes, that this was designed not necessarily, for economic recovery, but to provide relief for farmers. So if we think about that, we can see here that other programs, so other other programs such as the Agricultural Adjustment Act, okay, were designed to help to help people who were struggling, so groups who had been hit hard, like, in this case, farmers. Okay, so the point of the Agricultural Adjustment Act was to try to stabilize crop prices. Now, the other thing you could say about the Agricultural Adjustment Act is, when you think about this, that when we're in the middle of a depression, do we need, for most people, more food or less food? Okay, so as far as that, like, think about this. Y'all tell me, like, there's a, in a depression. Okay, so when we think about in a depression, oh, this is an interesting kind of thing here. I've got a whole lot of new things on my menu. All right, so as far as my question here, during a depression, we generally need more food or less food. Okay, so let's think about this. Like, a lot of people are out of work. What would you think? Like, do we need more food or less food? Less food. Interesting. Okay, so that is now one thing. Let's think about this though. Y'all are saying less food. What about for these people who? Okay, so now that I trend toward more food, people are saying that, but the first people are like, yes. Okay, so here's the thing though. If you think about this, that a lot of these New Deal programs are kind of counterintuitive, because if you're thinking about this, okay, if you're thinking about, like, when people are starving, if anything, we need more food, okay? But more food isn't good for these farmers who need relief from the government. And so the thing is that, some of the critics of the New Deal, they look at things like that. And depending on your argument, you've got, a lot of things you could say about the New Deal. But as far as one of the criticisms is, and that's one thing, if you look at, the disagreements over whatever the stimulus package is this designed to help the recovery of the nation as a whole, or is this designed just to help certain people, okay, and help certain groups? And if it's designed just to help certain groups, it generally is going to it's generally going to be bad for, if it's bad for the whole. Now, when it does that, yeah. So farmers, if farmers are doing poorly financially, that's not good. Okay, so Lily, you do note that it's just one of those things where it can be kind of a catch-22. Like, when it comes down to it, it's like, I think about all of us would say that people in the service industry should be getting checks. Like, let's think about this. Okay, when we think about this, should people today who work in service industries, and are out of work, get a check, get a relief check from the government? Okay, so we're going to say yes or no. Okay, so I want you to answer that question like today. Should people today who work in the service industries and are out of work get a relief check from the government? Okay, which the thing is that, yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with the people. Okay, like when it comes down to it, there is the guy at my favorite Mexican restaurant who has my order memorized. Okay, he's got my order memorized. And I saw him walk out last week and he's just like, I'd go somewhere, but I don't really have any money to go anywhere. I mean, he's basically sitting home, Okay, so here's the thing. Those of you who said no, I'm not going to call you out for being heartless, because we do have a catch-22 here. Because I say, you know what? My friend who has my order memorized at my favorite Mexican restaurant, I don't want him to starve. But do y'all understand that this relief package that they're looking at, it's going to add like $2 trillion to the national debt? Okay, so when we think about this, it's like, who's going to pay for this? Okay, so when it comes down to it, you 7 people who voted no, that when you think about this, that now we've got 8 voting no, but you're going to have to pay for this. It's like, long term, you're going to have to pay for this. Now, here we go. Let's think about this. Do you believe that the final package that is passed by Congress will be full of wasteful spending? Okay, so let's ask this question. Do you believe that the final package that is passed by Congress will be full of wasteful spending? Interesting. We've got a roughly kind of equal here. Yeah, so here's the thing that, like, basically, Meg, if we weren't in a democracy, this is like one of the things that's like troublesome about democracy in a way, because basically anything that's passed by Congress is politically motivated. Like, if we were to think about this, like, what Meg said here, that I would agree with you, that it's like we should be able to like find people who are directly affected. Like, for example, me as a teacher who's still getting paid, I shouldn't get a relief check. I think that some people are going to get, somebody's going to get, oh, Vanessa's here. Vanessa, it's always a pleasure to see you. And actually saw Vanessa one time in real life at Disney World, so before the age of social distancing. And so the thing is that what we want to note here, okay, y'all like to see me pour the tea, I think. So, I mean, the coffee. I usually got tea, but in this case, coffee. And so with that, yeah, that basically we don't have a lot. Like, what we can see in here is that 85% of you are like, yes, this is going to have wasteful stuff in it. And when you think about that, we've got a lot. I mean, this is a great topic to talk about today, isn't it? So the thing is, yeah, so Meg, and you can count on it that there are going to be people, there are going to be companies that, are going to need something to survive. Like, for example, I'm going to tell you, like, I'll go ahead and talk to you personally here. Like, I actually bought a little bit of like a small amount of Delta Airlines stock and last week. So the thing is, I've my E-Trade, I started an E-Trade account last week because I was like, this is panic. Okay, this is like, it's a good time. Okay. I had to put my phone down so I could dab. All right. So the thing is that, I bought some Delta Airlines stock, and there's some risk here because Delta Airlines, like, you could say in a market condition, they might go bankrupt. And I'm like, you know what? The government's not going to let them go bankrupt. Like, the government is going to, they're going to give money to people who don't need it. And they're also going, So they're also going to, they're also going to bail out these companies. They're not going to let these companies fail. And so when I saw that Delta Airlines stock went down from like, $60 to $20, I was like, I'm going to get it at $20. Now, it might go down a little more from where it is, but since I bought it, it stayed relatively the same. Okay, that's one thing that you learn as a history teacher. Yeah, my E-Trade account is actually like, it went slightly up. It's slightly up, not much, but I bought it at, I can actually, I can actually go into my account here. I'm now an investor. I used to invest when I was like in high school and had disposable income from my little grocery store job. But as far as that goes, yeah, Delta has remained stable and gone up just a little bit. So here's the thing, Meg. How does the government figure out who needs the money? If we think about this, okay, that in AP government, we talk about interest groups. Like basically, all of this, the reason the Democrats and the Republicans can't come to an agreement is because interest groups, okay? Yeah, and basically that's another thing. So Jeffrey, I think that what they're doing is a very like blunt, like not something that's surgical. It's not a surgical instrument. It's not like a surgeon using a scalpel. It's like a caveman with a club that basically if your income's this, oh, that messed up my light for me to swing around. But if your income is this, you're going to get this much without regard to whether you're actually out of work or not. Okay. So this is what we have to understand here, that we want, as Americans, I think we almost unanimously want there to be some relief for people who need it. But on the other hand, we also acknowledge that the government is wasteful at times like this. So that's something that I think is, and again, a catch-22. It's something that you're not going to have a perfect situation here. So you do have to understand that, yeah, the more relief we provide for people right now, y'all are going to be paying for it later. And, by that time, by the time it comes a concern, I'll be either dead or, sitting in a Turkish cafe, living in a low cost of living country off internet money. So we'll see. I mean, that's something, we'll see what happens. But, y'all are going to have to pay for this. I mean, this money is not free. So we have to understand the basic inefficiencies of, government. And so the benefits for the present are a burden for the future. Exactly. Okay. So as far as that goes, that, yeah, I mean, there is going to be wasteful spending, but nobody's going to say in this case that we shouldn't give people relief. Okay. Yeah. And airlines are an essential industry. Like, I didn't put, I put some money into it. I was like, look, let's put something into it. Not much, but I've always taught my students that if you have any cash on hand during a stock panic, go ahead and buy. Okay. So whether it was 2008, whether it, was 9/11, any of that stuff, like it's going to rebound. Okay. So, that's what's going to happen. So y'all remember that. I'm just basically acting out what I teach students when I buy a little bit of stock during a panic, because it's a good idea. Okay. So, and also it's a gesture of optimism. Think about Alexander Hamilton, when Alexander Hamilton said like, look, the people who bought that war debt from the veterans, they were the people who believed in this country. It's not my fault that the veterans sold their vouchers to get paid, and that the speculators have this stuff. Okay, so learn the lessons of history, ladies and gentlemen. So with that, we do want to understand that the recovery aspect was a failure in the sense that it did not stimulate recovery. Now, the National Recovery Administration, this is basically something, and I would say that this is the best, the best one in terms of noting something and noting the failure of this, that the National Recovery Administration was, a law that allowed, that basically allowed local boards, okay, so, local governing boards to come up with codes of fair competition, okay, codes of fair competition that, that made rules for businesses and what they could, made rules for what businesses could and could not do, okay, so, okay, and so that's the National Recovery Administration. Now, what we want to note here is somebody mentioned earlier, Schechter versus the United States, okay? And that is basically, that the Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, declared the NRA or NIRA or whatever, but typically I see NRA, but sometimes NIRA is what we see sometimes, like the National Industrial Recovery Act, declared the NRA unconstitutional, okay? And it violated a violation of the 10th Amendment and the Commerce Clause, okay? And so what we want to see here is that's something that it's just worth noting that the recovery was the least successful here. Now, also we want to note that New Deal programs, okay, New Deal programs were opposed by conservatives and radicals, okay? Conservatives said that it was too much, okay? Whereas radicals said it was too little, okay? Now, if you want an example of a radical, that would be somebody like Huey P. Long of Louisiana, which, funny story about Louisiana, actually my native state, is that, I read that basically in Louisiana, they've had some spread, like the coronavirus has spread in Louisiana faster than in other states because basically people in Louisiana what do you call it? They just didn't listen to the governor. And so they got the football coach, that water boy football coach, the national champion football coach. They got him to tell people that they need to stay inside, that they need to do social distancing and all that because people just weren't listening. And so they get the football coach to go into a press conference with the governor because maybe they'll listen to the football coach, Coach O, as they call him. So that's pretty funny. Okay. So Mardi Gras is going on at the same. Yeah. So it is about that. I thought Mardi Gras already happened, but yeah, a lot of people in Louisiana are just, they were ignoring what the government was saying. Now, of course, note that here's the thing too that y'all want to think about. And I'm not a health expert. Big disclaimer. I'm not a health expert, but y'all need to note that the measures here are not about keeping you from getting the coronavirus, which most of us are probably going to have to get it at some point. It's about slowing down the progress of the coronavirus. And so that's something that, you want to think about in terms of at some point we're going to need to. And at the point where we are doing too much, like, for example, like closing businesses in upstate South Carolina right now, that, they're saying that these measures may be relaxed in places where we don't have large outbreaks. And again, see, this is the thing when you think about the application of government power, which, I'm kind of running this like I would my classroom. In my classroom, I talk about what's going on now because it's important, right? And so what we want to note here is when we think about government action, like, was it really necessary all over the country to close like businesses? It's one thing to close schools, but like right now, are we in a situation in upstate South Carolina where all the restaurants need to close? So there you go. Now, Huey P. Long, I think that the Bernie Sanders comparison is definitely something that, you could say here, that Huey P. Long basically wanted to do a wealth tax. Maybe he's like the Elizabeth Warren / Bernie Sanders, because Elizabeth Warren was the one who wanted to do the wealth tax. And so Huey P. Long, which we've never done aside from inheritance taxes, but, to my knowledge, we've never done a tax of a living person's wealth, like of their savings in the history of the United States. And so Huey P. Long basically wanted to tax everyone. Yeah, so you could put all of this around that. Yeah, so Huey P. Long might have been one of the first people to call for the universal basic income, okay? But basically through, finance through a wealth tax. So yeah, I think that these are really good comparisons that y'all are making into the present day. So understand that the Supreme Court was dominated by conservatives at the time of Schechter. And so basically the conservatives were able to come in and say, you are, that FDR, you've gone too far. Now, one thing we want to note as well is that FDR, this launched, one thing that, this prompted FDR to, to propose a court packing scheme, okay? Basically, that would allow him to name more justices, okay? That would have allowed him to name, to nominate more justices. And that failed, okay? So that was basically FDR's first legislative defeat, okay? This is the first time that FDR requested something from Congress and Congress said no, because this undermines the separation of powers. Now, one thing to note, if you get, when you take AP government, if you take that class, is that eventually the Supreme Court came along with the New Deal, because FDR over time got to put more people into the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court did eventually become friendlier to New Deal programs. So that's something that I think should be noted as well. But do note that in terms of economic recovery, we can definitely see here, so, Great Depression, GDP. Okay, if we're looking at Great Depression GDP, going into a chart. So when we talk about like that, that the New Deal was not successful in bringing an end to the Great Depression, what we're seeing here is that we don't see a recovery in GDP until Europeans start killing each other. Okay, we really don't, it's like we don't get back to the way that, where we're seeing legitimate economic growth. Now, also, when you look at here, this is something that it doesn't count as recovery if it's public sector. Okay, so the thing is GDP, part of this GDP is public sector stuff, and that doesn't, just because the government's spending money doesn't mean that the economy is growing. Now, the unemployment rate, this is one of the best indications here that we see here, that unemployment went above 20%, and we don't see unemployment going down below 15% until Europeans start killing each other. So you see full employment in 1929. We don't get back to full employment until we see that World War II, okay? And of course, there was a lot of concern that when you look at, immediately after World War II, we see unemployment spiking, and there was a major concern that, are we heading back into the Depression? And so this is something that alarmed a lot of people. So we can see here that, when we look at the data, that's something. Now, who is that? It looks like it says Sherlock Holmes, but I know that's not Michael Hillegas, the first treasurer of the United States. Okay, I'd never heard of that guy before. Holly, have you heard of this guy? So yeah, okay, so interesting here. But note that, we do want to note that. Now, also reform, okay? What we're going to note about this is that, basically, the key here is to initiate reform and regulation, okay, in key areas to stop something, to stop another depression from happening. Okay, now the assumption here, now this is something, those of you who are, let me just take a quick poll here. I'm kind of curious. Let's look at our audience, not asking anybody to personally identify themselves, but just kind of curious here that I'm just going to say here, do you identify as, okay, so left of center or right of center, or do you just identify as a center? We'll put that. Actually, let me make y'all make a choice, because the thing is nobody's truly in the middle. So let's go ahead and, if you had to pick that, you say left of center, right of center, let's see what we've got here, because I'm kind of curious about that, because the Great Depression, like when you're writing about that, and it's something that I think is very important, because, for example, like last year, there was a prompt about the Civil War, about slavery in the Civil War, like evaluate the extent to which debates over slavery prompted the Civil War. Now, this is an interesting group of Gen Z, millennials, whatever. We've got, right of center actually is 2/3 of you. Okay, well, so the thing is, like with the Civil War prompt last year and slavery, like it didn't say that you had to say that slavery was the primary cause of the Civil War. Like there was definitely room for you to argue and articulate that either federalism, states' rights, federal power, or economics, economic differences between the sections, you could make that argument. But the slavery argument was given to you, evaluate the extent. You could say that slavery had very little to do with the start of the Civil War. If you could make that argument. So when we think about this, that the Depression, and the thing is, this was a very this wasn't a question in terms of a very specific question, but it's just interesting here. Now, given that a lot of you identify as right of center, let's think about this, that, when it comes to economics, okay, on economic issues, okay, how do you tend to identify? Okay, so I'm going to say here, I'm going to note here on one hand, fiscal conservative, moderate, and then I'm going to put here, liberal, if you identify as liberal or progressive, okay, and of course American liberal in that sense, okay, and I'm actually good because I teach European history, so I just have to put American liberal / progressive. Let's see how we do, we're talking about economic issues, so let's see how people identify here. Okay, so interesting, on economic issues it's much different. So y'all, okay, this is let me see the stuff coming in here, because this is, now of course I added moderate, so that's something, when you look at moderate versus fiscal conservative, that's outnumbering liberal progressive, but that's fascinating. So most of you are, it looks like, okay, fascinating. So I'm guessing that, a lot of you who said right of center, maybe slightly right of center, okay? This is very, very fascinating here. So when we think about economic issues, those of you who are on the fiscal conservative side, it's very important to note that there are a lot of explanations for the Depression, which if you're right of center on economic issues, fiscally conservative, you may not buy into some of the fundamental assumptions of the New Deal, okay? Because the New Deal basically operates under the assumption that there wasn't enough regulation. Okay, so so when it comes down to it, that the core assumption, okay, the core assumption is the Depression was caused by a lack of government oversight and regulation of business, okay, in the 1920s, because you saw in the 1920s, basically the government started to back off a lot of the progressive era regulations. Calvin Coolidge said the business of America is business, okay, that basically we are the point of the government is to support a very robust business climate, okay? And so one thing that you want to note here is some of you may not buy into that core assumption, and if you have an argument to back that up, that's okay. Last time we discussed a number of issues that were responsible for the Great Depression, including, now you could on one hand say that it was a lack of regulation, and you can have, evidence to back that up. On the other side, you could say that, these government policies from Hoover to FDR's New Deal, that basically all of these government policies together prolonged what could have been an economic panic. And so when you look at what's going on today, this is something that, I think President Trump tweeted in all caps recently, that something about the response to the coronavirus cannot be. Let's see what he said here. Okay, let's see how much. He's probably tweeting a lot. And so going from here, let's see what we've got here. Okay, so this he says we cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself. Okay, and this is one of those things, gosh, all caps, screaming at you here from the President of the United States. So we cannot let the cure be worse than the problem itself. And so those of you who are more on the free market side, you might be, prone to argue that this is much different here. So, it depends on your assumptions, but certainly the assumptions of the new dealers are that we need to stop this from happening again. Now, one thing that we can note is we've never had another scenario quite like the Great Depression. So when we look at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, now also we want to note here is the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, okay? And also you think about when FDR made his For Freedom speech, freedom from fear being one of those things. Of course, I think that we have, we've seen that the government is not, as successful in some of these, promoting freedom from fear in other places. But at the same time, when we think about this, that, the waiter that I mentioned earlier, he's not necessarily concerned about, he can get a check. Okay. Like, I think most people think that the government is generally going to help people who are in need. Okay. That the government's generally going to help people who are in need. Jackie Garcia and Noor Lane 845, Kanda. Thank y'all for the recent Instagram follows. And so we think about that restoring confidence in the economic system as well. So the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, basically it insures deposits in banks, okay? And basically what it does, it prevents, preventing bank runs, okay? If we think about bank runs, what a bank run was, this was happening, during the Depression, that basically what would happen is that somebody would say, I heard this bank's running out of money. And then somebody tells their friends, this bank's running out of money. If you have anything there, you need to get it now. If you've ever seen It's a Wonderful Life around Christmas time, that is a movie where you see an actual bank run, like this panic that people are out there. They're just running in there because they heard that that bank was running out of money. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because what ends up happening when people are running on the bank, okay? People are running on the bank, and this ends up being something that, it's a huge problem, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If everybody had to run on the bank wouldn't have run out of money if everybody weren't asking for their money back at once. And so what happens with the FDIC, that, basically if somebody said, hey, Richey, TD Bank is running out of money. And I would say, so I don't want to go out there and, be crowded over there trying to get my money out of there and get the coronavirus. Because if TD Bank goes under, then the FDIC is going to insure my deposits. Like, I'll get a check for whatever I had deposited in that bank up to $250,000. And I assure you, I have nowhere near $250,000 deposited in the bank. But for some of y'all who end up getting into big money later on, make sure that you deposit in separate banks. So it's $250,000 per institution. And so the thing is, what this does is, and this is something that I think was to a large extent a success, okay? That basically we have, when we think about reform measures, now, of course, for some people who are like, just very, very much into, deregulation and, economic, not a lot of government oversight, this is something, though, that's largely success in creating more security, okay? More security and confidence for people. So when we think about this, that, in terms of that, I am more likely to deposit my money in a bank because of the FDIC. Because I don't have to worry about the bank losing my deposits. And now the bank, in participating in the FDIC, also agrees to audits and regulations. And so with that, now we see the Securities and Exchange Commission. I think that my tutoring client was actually filling these out. A lot of these are, okay, so the Securities and Exchange Commission, this is the SEC, not to be confused with the football conference. And basically this is for regulates the stock market. I don't know if you've seen recently, like the insider trading, okay? So when we look at basically these U.S. senators, insider trading, we're seeing that there are 4 U.S. senators, and it's not exclusive to one party. Okay, it's not exclusive to one party. I think the largest stock dump was Dianne Feinstein, who was the Democrat, but it's one Democrat and 3 Republicans. Let's see. So insider trading, chart. Okay, there was something I saw, a graphic, what we saw earlier, that. Okay, what do we see? Okay, so I'm trying to find, but anyway, it's something that we see. One of these people's running for re-election right now, or to be elected, because she hadn't been elected. But anyway, there were 4 U.S. senators that basically dumped stock, and so we can see here that basically, that is something that is a crime. In order, if you use I don't know what exactly went on, what crime might have been committed, but this is something that when you get into this, they deny. Okay, now notice here, they're denying accusations of insider trading. Okay, they're facing calls to resign. But the thing is, insider trading is a crime. You can be prosecuted for that. So when we look at this, regulates the stock market in terms of, now also we look at things like, if there is a certain, I think we may have seen this recently, but if the stock market has enough of a dip in a day, automatically closes. Like, that is by law. There are laws that say if we see the stock market on a free fall, then it's going to close. Okay, it's going to close for the day, and we're going to give it time to cool off. So there are a lot of very useful regulations that are happening there. And so then the Federal Housing Administration. Okay, so it basically, we saw here that it reformed terms for mortgages. Okay, so when we see this, that it's making it easier for people to get a house. Okay, so when we look at the Federal Housing Administration, which we were talking about earlier, so we see that this was created, and what happens here, standards for construction, underwriting, ensuring loans made by banks and other private lenders for home building. Okay, and so basically we see here now it's also improving housing standards. Okay, so it basically reformed terms for mortgages, set standards for construction. Okay, so for quality of construction. And so these are some things that are happening that are going into the reform. So with that, I tell you right now, the New Deal is a big topic here. Okay, it's a big topic right now because we're right in the middle of this panic. And so what we have to think about, one thing that is very important for us to consider this week as we're talking about some of this stuff, is we want to, we're seeing here where we've got to think in terms of, okay, we want to try to slow down the spread of the coronavirus. Now, this isn't a proper hydro flask, but it looks like one, doesn't it? And so y'all can do your. All right. So the thing is, what they're having to worry about now is they're thinking, okay, we want to slow the spread of the coronavirus, but at the same time, if we have a single hospital bed that is empty, then we've basically done too much. Okay, because the main thing, what they're doing is not keeping us from getting the coronavirus. And again, I'm going to say I'm not a medical professional. I'm just ad-libbing here. Don't listen to me, listen to that Falsey guy or whatever. Okay, so as far as that goes, what we want to note here is if there are spare hospital beds, then they've done too much. Okay, so what they have to do here is they've got to figure out, how do we mitigate this crisis by putting as little harm on the economy as possible. And again, seems like we might be doing too much, we might be slowing the spread too much. And the more that we do, and that's something when you look at the catch-22 and the inherent problem of government action, it's like we want the government to act, but we know that not all of the government actions are going to be helpful, and some may actually be hurtful to the economy. So that's kind of what we learned from the New Deal, that, we want government to react to a crisis, but then it's like, be careful what you wish for. I mean, we all basically know that there are, which not all, but that's a little bit of a stretch. But, we did see that when I asked that wasteful spending, that 85% of you said, yeah, that whatever Congress passes is undoubtedly going to be full of wasteful spending. But at the same time, would we rather Congress do nothing? Okay, that's the other thing. So recommend someone to take AP or AP Gov. Why not both? Why not both? And so as far as that goes, that when we think about like the legacy of the New Deal, would we rather the government do nothing? I think that people are like, hey, we'd rather some package of wasteful spending rather than the government do nothing. Okay, so what were the biggest, and I think that we've gone into a lot of this stuff here. That we're looking at this. And Dev, I mentioned before again that I want to say again, we look at opportunities for African Americans. This is something, while FDR was not a proponent of civil rights legislation, there were several things such as the black CCC camps that we see that they are getting a lot of this economic relief. Now, one thing we might note is that a lot of these jobs, so for example, like I don't think that women were working for the CCC. So were there any female CCC camps? Okay, that would be interesting. So the she camp. Oh, interesting. Okay, let's look at this. This is fascinating. Okay, this is good. Dev, you have actually fostered a new inquiry here. Okay, so let's take a quick look here at what they call the she camps. Get it? They were organized. Now, Eleanor Roosevelt was was the first lady and a very prominent feminist. I think the first lady to really be an unconventional first lady in the sense that, she was very actively involved in policy making. And so, excuse me. So what we see here is that as a counterpart to the Civilian Conservation Corps. So we see here that basically, this was the men-only focus, left out young women who are willing to work in conservation and forestry. And so what we see here is that there is something here for unemployed women. Okay, so we see funded by a presidential order in 1933. So that is something that is incredibly interesting. So we see here that the public largely supported the new, so a huge success. The women's version barely topped 5,000 women annually and overall served 8,500 women. Okay, so now when we look at the CCC, let's see. So how many, when we're seeing here, maximum enrollment at one time was 300,000. Okay. So we do see here that, yeah, so unemployed women comparatively did not get a lot of, that's one thing that we could definitely note here, that, we could mention the she camps. Okay, this was something. So we look at the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, the she camps. That's it. She camps. These are, these were put, these were encouraged by Eleanor Roosevelt. Okay, so she was the first lady, and somebody who was a prominent feminist at that time. So encouraged by Eleanor Roosevelt, for unemployed women, only a fraction, okay, of the size of the CCC. Okay, so only a small fraction. So we could definitely say here that unemployed women, we would not say that unemployed women got equity at this time. Okay, so so most New Deal programs, okay, so were designed to help unemployed men. And of course, remember that this is before the second wave feminist movement. Okay, this is a time where we wouldn't have expected, like, if men and women would have been treated equally on this. This is something that you would not have, that you would not have seen. Gender equity was not really a concept. Now, one thing we want to note here, let's be careful in terms of noting those of you who are right of center. So I see here, Daniel, FDR was definitely a socialist. Okay, now the thing is, you're not going to get very far on the exam saying that. Okay, now when we think about socialism, now did FDR introduce a more vigorous public sector? Yes. Did FDR, like if we look at the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA, FDR was an advocate of public utilities. Now, one thing that we want to note, though, that while certainly FDR there was a massive increase in the public sector in the United States as a response to the New Deal, as a result of the New Deal. What we want to note here is that FDR did not seize the means of production. Okay, so when we think about when we think about this, James, he's not Eugene Debs. Okay, which there's no apostrophe there, but Eugene Debs, that he's not seizing the means of production. Okay, so he's not there were things that he could have done. So we think about, let's see, something like this. Okay, so when we think about this, that is there, a nationalization. Like when we think about this, and I don't, this is not something that's happening. He's not going in and seizing private property. Like he's not going in and taking over privately owned businesses. Okay, so that's something that is, that you want to note here, that you want, for success on the exam. I understand in economic conservative circles, talking about the New Deal as socialist is something that is definitely, something that, economic conservatives will call it socialist, but we also want to note that he's not seizing the means of production. So, he's not undermining the private, undermining, sure, crowding out the private sector, but he's not taking over the private sector and converting private industry to public industry. So we want to note that Huey P. Long was the person who was, who was it. Yeah. So when you look at this, it would be more appropriately called, social, an infusion of social democracy, or I would probably say social liberalism. It probably doesn't go quite to the point of social democracy, but definitely there are a lot of things about these New Deal reforms that align with the social democracy, which is distinct from socialism, because social democracy says that the belief is that the free market economy, okay, the free market economy is the basis, okay, so is the basis for the economy, that the private sector has a place. Okay, so yeah, this is very important. Now, Huey P. Long, share our wealth, that's socialist. Okay, Huey P. Long wanted some very massive, so that's very, very important. Don't go into the APUSH exam calling the New Deal socialist. That's not going to be the best course of action for this. All right, so as far as that goes, now Raniel Dadcliffe, that's this one. How did the U.S. compare to other countries? I don't think that's going to be relevant to the exam, so I wouldn't bark up that tree. All right. So as far as that, Kayla, we do have the, Google document there, and so yeah. So as far as that goes, y'all got some good stuff here now. What we want to note here, Nicholas, you're asking about the second New Deal. I would not get into those weeds, okay? If there are any teachers that want to comment on that, I would not get into the first and second New Deal. Okay, I would not get into differentiating between the first and second New Deal. Now, I don't know if I would compare Andrew Yang to Huey Long, because when you think about this, Huey Long wanted to, I don't think Andrew Yang has talked about a wealth tax, okay, of basically raiding the fortunes of the wealthy in order to pay for this. So I would be very very hesitant to make that kind of comparison there. So as far as that goes, I would not get into differentiating between the first and the second New Deal. Okay. So yeah, don't worry about like, this is a first New Deal program. This is a second New Deal program. Not an issue. Okay. Look at the New Deal as a whole. Now, the Supreme Court thing. Okay. So FDR's meddling in the Supreme Court. This is one of those things where we start to see sort of a lack of, like FDR's momentum is definitely halted. When we're thinking about Schechter, we would say here that it's being halted, okay? Or the momentum is being halted. The New Deal's not over because of Schechter, but I think that the momentum is halted. Now, the other thing here is when you start thinking about like this HBO show, the Plot Against America, that's basically like got this fictional Charles Lindbergh 1940 candidacy. What if Charles Lindbergh would have run for president in 1940? By 1940, now I think the consensus among a lot of people is that if there weren't a war situation in 1940, that FDR very well could have been denied a third term because he was seeking something that had never been done. He's basically like, look, I'm better than George Washington. And Americans were very hesitant to switch horses midstream. It's like basically we've got this global crisis and people weren't willing to try somebody like Wendell Willkie was the Republican nominee in 1940. And if he would have won, he would have had a distinction that Donald Trump has, okay? That Donald Trump is the only United States president never to have a commission in the United States military and never to have held public office. And so Wendell Willkie was the first like major party nominee, I believe, who had never had that distinction. Wendell Willkie was a businessman. Now, if Wendell Willkie, though, had been Charles Lindbergh, Charles Lindbergh maybe could have defeated FDR. So who knows? That's it. Yeah, FDR is the reason that that Congress proposed the 22nd Amendment, 2 terms, 22nd. That's an easy one to remember. That yes, the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution, which was proposed by Congress, ratified by the states. This was in response to FDR ignoring George Washington's 2-term precedent. So yes, that is part of our Constitution. Because of FDR, it was decided that this should not be allowed to happen again. We don't need a life president. That is against the principles of republicanism. Now, remember, small r republicanism, that has nothing to do with, whether somebody's a member of the Republican Party, but rotation in office. Okay. So we see with FDR, yes, but I think that, I want to keep watching the show. I want to get into this, maybe read the book, but yeah, it's interesting to think about what if it had been Charles Lindbergh that was nominated by the Republicans. I mean, somebody who was like an American, just a recognized American hero, that Charles Lindbergh was a thorn in FDR's side, even not running for president. So did Charles Lindbergh consider running? I'm just looking at this. Did Charles Lindbergh consider running for president? Okay, so this show is actually has actually got people going into this. Like, did Charles Lindbergh was a political activist? Did he ever run for president? Okay, so we see here that when we look at Lindbergh, let me show you this article I'm looking at here. But it's important to note that and especially imagine if it hadn't been for the war stimulating the economy. Let's think about now, Nazi sympathizer, that is point of view. So we want to think about this, that, yeah, so Lindbergh as a Nazi sympathizer is a matter of point of view. Now, did he minimize the threat of the Nazis and speak in terms of like, this does not affect the United States? Yes. Did he go and receive medals from the Nazis? Yes. Okay. But as far as that goes, there's a bit of interpretation, okay? But yeah, the Nazis definitely wouldn't have been disappointed if Charles Lindbergh had defeated FDR. But I want to do some more research, because we'll talk about that more next time. But was the America First Committee, which of course people who wanted to get involved in the war, they're going to say that these are fascist sympathizers. Are the people that were responsible for the America First Committee, were they fascist sympathizers, or were they just well-meaning Americans who wanted to avoid war? And so that's something that we want, that again, that's a matter of interpretation, and that's why we enter into historical inquiry. The book and the show are called The Plot Against America. And so as far as that goes, that we see here that he was a big advocate of American neutrality. But we see here his involvement as an activist, i.e. a Nazi sympathizer. He never ran for the presidency. Okay, so we see here that that this is something that, yeah, he never ran for the presidency. I'm curious. Let's see, criticize their strong okay, so that's very interesting where that's going. But it's an interesting what if, because could Charles Lindbergh have defeated FDR? Because the thing is, FDR won a very convincing victory in 1936. Let's look at 1936 presidential election, just as kind of an illustrator of what I'm talking about here. So in terms of that, Reagan was not a boomer. Reagan was from a generation, like the boomers were younger. Okay, boomer from Reagan would have been just like me saying, okay, Gen Zer. That would have been Reagan saying, okay, boomer. So when we look at the 1936 presidential election, we'll note here that FDR had a 48 state victory, like Nixon in 1972, Reagan in 1984, 60%. Okay, 60% of the popular vote goes to FDR. Now then, when we look at 1940, okay, that we see here that 54% versus 44%. Now that's Wendell Willkie. Nobody really knew who he was. Nobody thought, oh, Wendell Willkie's an American hero. Okay, but Wendell Willkie got 44% of the vote. Now notice as well that you see a resurgence here in the in the Great Plains and in the Midwest. And when we think about this, that's kind of interesting, because who lives there? Farmers. So New Deal programs had been designed to help farmers, but you're seeing these agricultural states start to turn from supporting the New Deal. So, what you want to note here is, yeah, there was a perception among Americans at that time, among many Americans, that the New Deal programs were not effective in helping bring about economic recovery. So that's something that you'll want to think about. So yeah, a lot of interesting stuff here when we're looking at this, and I think we've gone to the 90-minute mark. So I'm going to go ahead and call it a day. But I would encourage you, if you've got HBO. Now, again, I'm not saying this is your teacher. I'm saying this is a YouTube personality. I don't know if everything in the show is appropriate, because I haven't watched the entire first episode. So I'm just saying, like, on your own time, it might be interesting to watch this show, The Plot Against America. But then again, I'm not vouching for its full appropriateness or anything like that. But something I'm going to be watching just kind of out of interest in this whole thing. And it kind of goes into some of the things that we're going to be talking about next time when we get together on Wednesday at 2 p.m. to talk about American neutrality. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all for joining me. And it is always a pleasure.